8 games, 24 points, and lots of twists and turns to come. This is the final countdown of Norwich City's championship season, and it can be quite a bumpy ride. Let's see how it transpires. Welcome back to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast in association with Future Radio. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt. We've obviously had a little bit of a stock take, given we've gotten it, or we're currently in an international break coming through the other side of it, but we've still got plenty to discuss on the show. We'll obviously be looking ahead to Norwich City's final 8 games. We've got a little bit of audio to bring you from Tony Springett, who I went to watch in inverted commas for Derby against Peterborough on Saturday, and I've got a few little anecdotes to share around that, and we'll also be taking a look at a wider part of the next generation of Norwich City players coming through in light of obviously the news around highly rated youngster Alex Matos, who looks poised to complete a move to Chelsea. So it may be quiet in terms of games, Paddy, but it's certainly not been a quiet international break. How are you? How are you finding things?
Not too bad, Connor. Just saying off air, wasn't we, that boring bit of work chat for anybody who's listening or maybe watching this, but it's always a challenge when you've got essentially a 2-week span in between games from a content point of view. But by this stage, you're a little bit on fumes in terms of trying to find content, but it hasn't felt like that, I don't think. And we would, as you touched on already, the Matos story. We had the touch point with Springett. The usual sort of cycle of guys who've gone off and played for their countries and done some media. So, yeah, all in all, we even throw in another line out of Turkey today, in fact, around Mila Rashica and where his future may lie. Hasn't kind of felt an endless countdown to Sheffield United. It actually has felt like maybe a good chance just to take stock if you're David Wagner and his coaches and players and maybe sort of decode what went wrong really post Millwall and what felt like really harnessed that momentum, and it was going to be full steam ahead. And unfortunately for me, it feels like it's just stalled. One goal scored in the subsequent 3 games, 2 points out of a possible 9, and a sense that maybe now it's in rebuild rather than sort of refresh and tweak territory come the summer, which we'll get into in due course, I'm sure, today. But I think, I don't know whether it's misplaced optimism or not, but I think there's something to look forward to this Saturday, Carrow Road, Sheffield United, and a team who seemingly locked in that battle with Middlesbrough to get the second automatic spot behind Burnley. But it's a good fixture, I think, from the point of view of Norwich and David Wagner, because it will focus the minds. They will know purely in terms of the opponent that they need to be at it, because Sheffield United will be at it, and if they are at it and they can get a result to go with a performance, then the rest of what looks a tricky few games ahead can be sort of attacked with a bit more optimism rather than almost navigating a path to the summer and what comes next. So this is big now. I mean, we'll get into it. I think there's 8 league games left, but for me, it boils down to the next 4 and the teams they're going to play, because I think ultimately, if they come through that 4-game swing and they haven't got themselves in a top 6 position or very, very close to it, I think the game's up, basically. So it really, really is now or never, ultimately, if it's going to be, as David Wagner appealed, post-Stoke, a reset and forget the disappointment, forget what it was all about, automatic, that's gone. But you can still achieve what the objective was at the start of the season, which was promotion back to the Premier League. So, we'll try and strike an optimistic note, Connor. I don't want to speak for you, but I think we will try and be upbeat. We had a good Q&A on the PinkUn app, I thought, on Monday afternoon, myself and you, for 40-odd minutes, some really, really good conversational topics around Norwich and a sense of realism. I thought, rather than doom and gloom, it was kind of, okay, well, if it plays out as most people maybe fear it's going to now over these next 8 games, what needs to happen next? What are the building blocks to turn things around and get this club again, as they have been previously at this level, really competitive and really harbouring genuine hopes of getting back to the Premier League. And of course, then we'll deal with what the Premier League looks like when they get back there. But in the here and now, it's obviously crossroads territory for me. This is where we've reached. It's either going to go and peter out this season over these remaining 8 games, or they're going to find what they look like they've found at Millwall recently, and then we can really, maybe look forward to quite an exciting end to the season. That'd be nice.
It would indeed, and we will come back to that and discuss those 8 games. I thought I'd address this. Won't mean much if you've got us plugged into your ears or listening on whatever device in terms of audio. But if you're watching, and I'll use the word watching on YouTube, hello, look, we can wave at you now. We are trialing some video. So if you like this format of the podcast, then tell us you like it. If you rather not see our faces, which is totally understandable, you can also tell us that as well. But you get to see my lovely yellow walls and curtains and Paddy's lovely brown door and whatnot. So enjoy that. But it was literally that this is how we kind of, I won't bore you with the specifics.
Connor, sorry. I'm getting visions because we discussed before we started recording that, again, boring work chat, but every summer we kind of sit down and try and in a vain attempt to sort of suggest that we do think about the content we produce, look at where we could tweak it, improve it, refine it, drop what doesn't work, maybe embellish what we think does work. You've come up with a new feature, Homes of the PinkUn. I think we might have to think about that in our summer chat.
Who's going to play Dion in that situation?
We'll get the man himself. Hooks will get him on board. I'm sure if Hooks is listening or watching, we can strike a deal.
What we'll do is we'll get Dion on one week and we'll just sit in our backdrops and we'll just have him absolutely hammer. The way, no pun intended, the way that the house is kind of set up, and
my wife would love that, Connor. Yeah, no, to bring it on. Yeah, it's all about the home improvements.
It would be that door, knock it out, and get rid of those yellow walls. I can hear it now. But anyway, we digress. So yes, we're trialing some visuals on YouTube. This is only, and again, not to bore you with specifics, which I was saying before. Paddy mentioned Dion Dublin and Homes Under the Hammer. We are. Basically, this is how we record the podcast if it's not a home game. If it's a home game, we then go back to the office and it becomes a little bit difficult for various reasons to film it. But if it's an away game or we're doing it on an ad hoc, but if there's a broadcast during an international break, this is how we record in the same way that we do videos. So we might as well use the visuals and you might as well use them. Again, if you're listening on audio, I appreciate that none of that section would have been relevant, but you might want to pause and you might want to go away and watch this on YouTube. So it's up to you. Fully understand if not. And as I say, please do give us feedback if that is the case and you like to see more of that, and as Paddy says, something that we're experimenting. So there we go. Paddy, international breaks more broadly before we come on to Norwich City, how do you find them? Because I for one, I can't stand them. They're not for me. I feel so it was okay for me because as I said, I was at Peterborough Derby at the weekend, but if I'm not at a football match on Saturday, and even I would extend this and say I feel it if Norwich are playing on a Friday or a Sunday, but if I'm at home on a Saturday, I kind of feel like I should be somewhere, and I don't really like watching England play qualifiers. I know they played Italy, which is a respectable opponent by all accounts, and Ukraine obviously had a lot of emotion. I didn't watch a minute of either game, just no interest in it. I mean, what's kind of your perspective on international football, and how much do you indulge over the breaks of Norwich City that we get?
Indulge? No, definitely not. On your end of the scale. Well, not quite. I mean, I didn't see any of the Italy game. That was previous Thursday, wasn't it? I think. And the England game only drew me in really because of the James Maddison factor, really. Fellow Coventry, so and obviously formerly of this parish, and did very well. And Norwich a tidy penny, which might become relevant again this summer. But if Maddison hadn't been playing, I don't think I'd have. And I didn't watch the entirety of that game. I think I sort of got bored by half time when they'd clearly got themselves in control, and then it was a very low-paced, pretty anemic affair. Ultimately,
I'll tell you what I did watch. I don't know if you watched this game. I watched. It was last midweek. It was Sheffield Wednesday Barnsley Sheffield Wednesday in League One. Cracking game. I think it finished 3-2, if memory serves. But that was, from my perspective, far more entertaining than I get from any kind of international friendly or qualifier. That's kind of what I'm getting at, I suppose. But yeah, I'd much rather go out and walk the dog or do other stuff than watch qualifiers, I guess. Or kind of, even though it is competitive football, it doesn't really feel like competitive football.
I take your point. I mean, I'm obviously considerably older than you, Connor, and I've had too many disappointments following England at major tournaments. So I think the well is dry, although I still get swept along when they, like they have done in the recent tournaments, go pretty deep. But to bring it back round to, no, I quite liked having a weekend off because it is quite a novelty and you can do things with the family or whatever and just chill out a little bit. And it's pertinent because we're going to get there pretty soon. When we get to the summer, that feeling only lasts for about one weekend, and then there is a bit of a almost disorientating feel to a Saturday and not doing anything football related around Norwich City, or a Sunday as we work in the loosest sense, but producing content. So yeah, rapidly the feeling of, oh, this is nice. This is quite pleasant not to be having to think about football in a content perspective on a Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, which is where I was anyway last weekend. But I can guarantee if we rolled it on and there was no Norwich game this weekend, then I would be getting a little bit
not agitated. Is that the word?
Yeah. I was trying to think. Probably better to ask my wife. She would certainly be getting a bit agitated with me being around the place. And
you sound like a football manager who's at work. That's what you make that sound like.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, no, but it is. It's and obviously what we're talking about is ultimately, because we're coming at it from a media point of view. But I'm sure if you're a regular Norwich fan, season ticket holder, or one of those that goes away as well, it's the same process, isn't it? You know, you kind of, your weekends are the framework is Norwich City and consuming that, be it in the media or as a fan. And then when there isn't any Norwich City, it is quite a strange feeling. And we'll have to deal with that in the summer, obviously, as we always do. But even that now feels increasingly quite a short. I mean, it's almost, by the time you've tied all the threads together off the back of a season, there'll be a few sort of contractual elements to tie up, and that'll be the case, obviously, with certain individuals who are at the end of their Carrow Road terms this time around. So it's never the final game comes and then that's it. We'll see you again in August. It's kind of a week, 2 weeks after. There's still bits and pieces to do, but then it'll go a bit quiet sort of through June. And of course, the nature of it now, by the end of June, they tend to be coming back into Colney for pre-season, and then very, very short order after that, the pre-season sort of swings into view. So, that summer, winter, of course, in the absence of football, you'd like to think there's a few transfer bits and pieces we can get our teeth into. But again, that may or may not be the case this summer. And again, I think that'll be heavily dependent on what happens in these remaining 8 games, because the finances will dictate what Norwich can or can't do, and that will be heavily dictated by league status, whether it's Premier League and all the riches that accrue, or it's Championship and having to be very creative and generating funds. And probably the main plank of that will be player sales, ultimately, player exits. So, but yeah, no, so that's a long-winded way of saying, didn't mind it, having a weekend off, but wouldn't want to make a habit of it.
Yes, and I'll come back to what I was doing on Saturday later on. I appreciate the opening 13 minutes of this podcast makes it feel like we're filling time, and we're definitely not doing that because there is lots to talk about. We just go off on various tangents. Let's talk about these final 8 games then, Pad. It's so 8 games. I've got to try and remember the maths now. 24 points. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. And some really interesting games that Norwich City have within that. I thought actually I'd start by just reading out Norwich City's remaining fixture list, because I think particularly the next 4 I'm looking at and saying actually we'll probably have a relatively conclusive answer as to whether Norwich City are going to finish in the top 6 come the end of that 4th game against Middlesbrough on the 14th of April. So this is Norwich City's remaining 8 games. They start obviously this Saturday by welcoming Sheffield United to Carrow Road. We then go to Ewood Park on Good Friday. Jordan Hugill's Rotherham in City on Easter Monday. Then it's Middlesbrough on the Friday night at 8 o'clock. Thank you very much, Sky Sports. QPR away the following midweek. Then Russell Martin brings his Swansea side to Carrow Road. We all travel to West Brom for the penultimate game of the season there, before obviously welcoming Mick McCarthy's Blackpool to Carrow Road for the final day on May the 8th. It's a really interesting run of fixtures, Pad. I do think that even though there's 8 games left, and we will talk probably about those as an entity, as one kind of list as they are, I think it would be remiss of us not to zoom in specifically on those first 4 that Norwich have coming off this break. Sheffield United obviously are in second. Blackburn. Sorry, I've got the wrong black club there. They're 5th, and then obviously Rotherham, who are fighting for their lives at the bottom end of the table, which, as we've said on this podcast before, can often be dangerous or more dangerous than a mid-table side at this stage of the season. And then obviously travelling to third place Middlesbrough. So I think it's fair to say, come the end of those 4 games, we're going to have a really decent picture of where Norwich City sit. So with that in mind, let's just look at these 4 games first. How many? Well, it's up to you, really. You can. I'll let you decide. You can either go for how many wins Norwich need from the 8, or you can zoom in specifically on this 4 and say what you feel they'll need from those. So I'll leave that open to you.
Yeah, I think I'd probably ultimately it is about getting to the end point of the top 6. So for me, it's how many from these 8 games they need to win, and I think we looked at it recently, didn't we? And I'm just going to double check where they are in terms of points.
Yeah, 57. It's 5 to 73. I think 5 wins would get them to 73, which I think if you got 73 points and you didn't get in the playoffs, you would be pretty disappointed. But I would also say it doesn't absolutely guarantee it. And 6 wins would get them to 75, I think, or 7. No, I've confused myself now. 75, 76, 72, 73. Those are roughly the figures for 5 and 6 wins. So I think 6 would guarantee it, but 5, I think you'd be disappointed if you didn't make it with that.
Well, I mean, you say that, Connor, but I've got the table in front of me now, and Norwich 7th on 57, Coventry level on points, West Brom, Watford, both clubs harbouring the same ambitions, only 2 points further back. Sunderland, Preston, 2 further back from that. So essentially, I've listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clubs, including Norwich, separated by 4 points outside of the top 6. If as you would expect, it's reasonable to assume some of those will go on a run. I think it could nudge the 6th point tally up a little bit. So I think 6. I think it will need 6 wins out of 8 to guarantee with a lowercase g maybe, but get into the top 6. And if you bring that back round then to the fixtures Norwich have got, are they going to win 6 of the remaining 8 games when they've got Sheffield United, Blackburn, Rotherham, and Middlesbrough? So 3 of those 4 are teams, either challenging for automatic or very much in the playoff mix. And it's a tall order to think you could come through those 4 and win maybe 3 of them. So, 2 of those being away, of course, as well, Blackburn and Middlesbrough. So you begin to see the degree of difficulty, and you also see what a missed opportunity since Millwall. Sunderland at home, 1-0 defeat, Huddersfield away, going 1-0 up as well, and so dominant in that first half against the team who were really struggling at the wrong end of the table, even with the Neil Warnock factor, and yet they're not clinging on at the end, but probably thankful to escape with a point in that second half. And then Stoke, a complete non-entity, but for Angus Gunn, they get beat that day. Even 4 points from that sort of 9 points available instead of the 2 that they took, then it probably lessens the need to go 6 from 8 for me. So, but that's where we are. And I think that's ultimately what David Wagner was trying to get to the nub of post Stoke when he spoke to me immediately after the game, that don't live in the past, that don't get hung up on the disappointment of what's gone. Can't be changed now. It's all about these remaining 8 league games and plotting a path to the playoffs. And yeah, of course, we can't say definitively you get 6, you'll be in the playoffs. It might take slightly less than that, but I think it'd be very tense, sort of going into the West Brom and particularly the Blackpool game last day of the regular season, if they were really on the cut line. And I think you'd probably be relying on favours from elsewhere if you got to that point and you hadn't won the games that you needed to put it in your own hands ultimately. But that's where Norwich have found themselves, and that's ultimately a byproduct of not being able to control their own destiny to the degree they needed to up to this point. They've had plenty of games, plenty of months, plenty of opportunities, some false dawns along the way, even with Dean Smith, and you could argue with David Wagner, but ultimately in the here and now, they need probably, I feel, 6 from 8. And if you ask me to put my mortgage on it, then I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's likely rather than possible. It is possible, but what we've seen, particularly in the last 3 games, are we convinced? Are we even not vaguely optimistic that Norwich can find the goals they need to find, which have proven elusive, that they can remain defensively resolute? I'm not sure. I think so much has to fall into place, and I'm not sure that 2 weeks since Stoke, particularly with a lot of the internationals away. It's not like Wagner's been able to lock them away at Colney for 2 weeks of double sessions and really work on things on the training pitch. Ultimately, there'll be players who rock back up at Colney in the next few days that haven't been anywhere near the place since Stoke. And that's just the nature of having a squad who are deemed good enough to go off and represent their respective countries. So I think it will take 6 wins from 8. I don't think they'll get that. And ultimately, I think that's why we'll be looking at a summer refresh / rebuild. I'm going to throw that one straight back to you, Connor. So from the 8 games, or if you just want to do it in the 4-game sample coming up, what do you think they'll realistically get, and will that be enough?
Yeah, I'm with you. I probably think 5 would do it, and that's my view. And actually, I look at it, and I'm with you. I don't feel it's impossible. So you look at it. They've got 4 home games left. Obviously, starting with Saturdays against Sheffield United, but after that, their remaining home games are Rotherham, Swansea, and Blackpool. So if Norwich won those 4, you'd probably need a win from elsewhere, and obviously they go to QPR, Blackburn, Middlesbrough, West Brom. I don't think I missed any there, have I? No. So that again feels possible. I wouldn't say it feels impossible, but yeah, certainly the feeling that this group has imparted on all of us, and the feeling that it's left us with has probably suggested that actually this group probably hasn't shown over the course of the season so far, and this is where they're going to have to change narratives in the final 8 games, that they can put together a sustained run of performances. They've got the Huddersfield performance in them, the Sunderland performance in them, and they really struggle. I don't think we've seen them put certainly more than 3, but definitely more than 2. Well, no, sorry, other way around. Definitely more than 3, but probably even more than 2 performances together back to back. So that makes it very difficult, I think, to then navigate a route for them into the playoffs. And that's why I think we're zooming in specifically on these 4 games, because I'm with you. I think they need to win 2 of Sheffield United, Blackburn, Middlesbrough, obviously on the basis that they beat Rotherham as well. And if they do that, then suddenly you go into the final 4 games with probably a lot less pressure on yourself. You probably need to win 2, maybe 2 or 4, which again, not completely unreasonable. It's just the fact there's no margin for error. So Sheffield United, which feels like a game that Norwich are going to really struggle with, and we'll come on to that towards the end of the pod, that's going to be a difficult one to get 3 points from. And if they don't do it there, then you've got to go to Blackburn, who will be viewing this game against Norwich as massive to their season. And if they lose that one, then again, it becomes tough. And actually, if you get to a stage where even if you've won one of those 3 games, you're looking at the last 4, probably feeling that you have to win certainly 3 of 4, but maybe even 4 of 4. So that's probably why it does feel a big ask. And maybe if those fixtures were flipped, I don't know if that would make you more confident, because at least then they'd be able to get some form up. So yeah, I think they need at least 2 wins from those 3 games that I've mentioned in the next 4, plus obviously beating Rotherham, which I understand we're kind of talking about as being a given, certainly isn't a given, to kind of set them up nicely for the final 4, where maybe you'd be looking at the fixture list as being a little bit kinder, but certainly within that, we know what the Championship is like. There's no kind of additional guarantees within that. So that's kind of what I feel and what I think will happen. I think they'll get beaten by Sheffield United. I could actually see them doing something away at Blackburn. I've not been majorly impressed with them all season, really. So I could see them winning that. Could see them winning Rotherham, and I think they'll get beat at Middlesbrough. So again, I think if we got to that stage and they'd won 2 of those 4, I think you'd probably then need to win another 3 from 4 against QPR, Swansea, West Brom, Blackpool. Not impossible, but it feels tough, and it makes the margin for error so tight. So yeah, it is tough. I think they'll struggle away at QPR, because they do historically. Russell Martin's Swansea, I think, is a really intriguing one. I think they I don't know, Norwich traditionally do quite well at West Brom, but it's really tough, I think, to sit here and navigate a path to the playoffs, and that's kind of where I'm at, and that's based purely on feeling. And I think we've said on the podcast now for a while that we both think that they're going to drop just short of it. So that probably I'll probably save what I'm going to say. I mean, how many points do you? So we've said what we think they'll need to get in. So what do you think they'll get from those? I'm probably asking you to do some maths on the spot, so I might fill in. But so maybe I'll do mine first. So if I'm saying 3 at Blackburn, 3 at Rotherham, I'll go a draw at QPR. So that's 7. Beat Swansea 10. lose to West Brom, beat Blackpool, so that would give them 13. And I'm probably being quite optimistic there, really. So that would end them on. You're gonna have to hang on. Let me get my calculator up. So what are they on at the moment? 57 plus 13. That would put them on 70. I don't think that would be enough personally. It might do because this season is really bizarre in itself. But that's me being uber optimistic as well, Pad. So you did say you wanted us to be optimistic. So that's the way that I've gone. I've given you some time to work out yours. So more or fewer than 13 are you going with?
I think, Connor, I've got them. I just had my calculator on the go. So I think I've got them on 72, which is, I don't think would be enough. I think I can see them getting a result against Sheffield United, draw at Blackburn, beat Rotherham, and then maybe lose at Borough. I think they'd get something at QPR, and then I'd fancy them to maybe win 2 of the last 3. So I've kind of talked myself into a space where I didn't think 6 from 8 was doable. But as you say, it might not need 6 from 8. It will certainly, if it doesn't.
Does it hinge on the home games? Because that's kind of the way that I look at it. But if they win on Saturday, they've got a really good chance of winning the remaining home games.
Wouldn't disagree. Yeah, it's still a tall order, as Sunderland proved when they turned up at Carrow Road and frustrated Norwich and deservedly went away with the points. That you can't really discount a Swansea or Blackpool from doing something. And particularly, the stories around both of those. Swansea and Russell Martin, Mick McCarthy, Blackpool. They possibly will need points to stay up. He'd like nothing better than to give his former East Anglian rivals a punch on the nose, metaphorically. So, there'll be lots of sort of strands off all of these games, but that isn't beyond them to go maximum points at Carrow Road. I mean, we saw prior to the sort of the misstep against Sunderland that it looked like David Wagner had cracked the code after an endless season of frustration in front of their own fans. They'd gone win and looked good doing it as well. So they can do that. It's more, my eyes cast more to Blackburn away, Middlesbrough away, West Brom away. I think that those are very, very difficult assignments. And, I think it's a tall order to expect Norwich to go to those destinations and get maximum points. So ultimately, I think what we're kind of saying, if it is going to happen, whether you feel it will or not, but if you're looking at it in terms of breaking down the 8, then the vast majority of the haul of points has to come at Carrow Road. And that's why, particularly after the back of Sunderland, this coming Saturday is massive for so many reasons. It's massive because they need to harness again that momentum it felt they were building after Millwall. They need to put right the Sunderland result in front of their own fans, but also what a signal that would send. To get the better of Sheffield United, it would more or less say, okay, looks like Norwich are not quite gone, and they do have a little bit of life left in them, and particularly for the teams who have yet to go to Carrow Road, they know it's going to be a difficult challenge, and that can all come from a result and a performance this Saturday. So I don't think it's overstating it. This is the biggest game of the season because of the corner they've backed themselves into.
Yes, I would agree. I feel like we've both been quite optimistic there. I wonder, and maybe this is something that we can post out on our various socials and that people can get in touch with us about before obviously Saturday's game. How many points do you guys listening feel they will get? Do get in contact with us. We'd love to hear your opinions as to whether we've been completely irrationally high or maybe even a little bit modest in terms of their chances. It will be interesting to kind of gauge where you think. And then the second part of that question, how many points is going to be required for them to get into the top 6? Just a final question, Pad, before we hear from Tony Springett and talk a little bit about the next generation. So much focus has been put on getting into the playoffs, and that's obviously what the conversation has been around in the last few weeks. So I'm going to frame it a little bit differently. Does getting into the playoffs drastically change how this season will be perceived? And I mean that in terms of, I think if you went outside Carrow Road on match day, polled 1,000 Norwich City fans and said, this Norwich City group haven't finished in the top 6, is that a failure, yes or no, and gave them a very binary vote, I think you get a lot more yeses than no's. Would that shift dramatically if this group gets into the top 6, irrespective of how it goes in the playoffs? Does that completely change how this season is perceived? And could you make a case that it hasn't been a total disaster? Is that maybe where we're at now? If you kind of understand what I'm asking you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, no, a disaster wouldn't be finished. A disaster would be relegation or, bottom six. It's all degrees, it's all relative. But no, if they finished in the top six, then and came up short in the playoffs, no, I don't think that would be a disaster. There's another D. Would it be a disappointment given that the ambition from inside the club, from senior figures inside the club, from the playing staff, was, if not to replicate what they did the last two times at this level and win the title, certainly to get automatic, then yes, that falling short in the playoffs is a long way short of that. So that would constitute failure by the club's own measure. But I think maybe where you're going with that is would it change the kind of the feeling of what comes next? Really, if this group have galvanised themselves and we've seen more evidence of the good things that David Wagner has managed to impart on this group of players, then I think that would allow you to go into the summer still with the caveat that they need to get a lot of things right in terms of reshaping the squad. But I think the positive side of the ledger would outweigh the negative in terms of, okay, under this head coach, with a proper pre-season, is a real chance to put his own imprint on the group of players, not the ones he inherited, and then a full season to attack in the Championship. I think there would be more optimism if they continue on the path they're on post Millwall and it tails off and they finish anywhere between, I don't know, 7th and 10th. Then I think the mood music is different. So, that's an interesting one, that they're actually playing for maybe more than simply, which is the main objective, clearly, to get out of the division. But the one before that is obviously to get in the playoffs. That's where we're at now. But I think more broadly, there's a lot in terms of the narrative and the shifting moods that can either go in a positive or a negative direction from how they approach it. And if they fall short, they fall short. But it's how they fall short, I think, that could be very important moving into a pivotal summer, for the reasons we all know about in terms of the lack of financial resource to do anything, certainly as it stands. And anything that they do will be, if it is Championship football they're planning for, wholly dependent on self-financing, and that probably equates to player exits from the current roster. So, yeah, I think there's a lot riding on these 8 games in terms of, clearly in the short term, getting into the playoffs and then having a good crack at the Premier League via the playoffs. But I think realistically, the mid-term of bringing in a coach in January who they believe maybe chimes a bit closer to what Webber has sought to build here, and that connection with the fan base, and the parallels with Daniel Farke, not only in nationality but in terms of characters and personality, and that warmth and that kind of almost enthusiasm that he brings to how he carries himself, David Wagner. I think all of that is there, but it needs to be backed up by results and performances. And right now, it'd be interesting if the season stopped right now. How would a David Wagner season, or half a season, not even that, but a David Wagner spell in charge of Norwich in January, how would it be perceived? And that'd be a very interesting one, because I'm sure if you'd have polled immediately after the final whistle at Millwall, a lot of fans would have been saying, well, this guy's for us. And I'm not saying necessarily that isn't the case now, but I think there's a bit more realism around the challenges that he faces moving forward off the back of the last 3 games. And maybe for a lot of people, media and fans alike, is sort of a confirmation that some of these players have reached the end of the road, and then it does need a refresh, and it does need to be livened up a little bit. And I think privately, if you spoke to David Wagner, he might concur with that. But ultimately, he's in the heat of still a realistic attempt at getting in the playoffs. So, of course, in the here and now, it's all about backing these players to deliver. But yeah, I think both short-term objectives but medium-term feeling, these next 8 games are pretty important. Yeah.
Just finally then, before we hear from Tony Springett, let's have your top 6, Pad. How do you see it finishing? Obviously, you've got Burnley; they're gone. So let's both say they're champions. How does it line up for you after that? Let's just have team names. Let's not go for explanations. Let's just see if Cov wangle their way in there.
Well, it's a very difficult one for me to be dispassionate with the boys in blue, but Sheffield United, Middlesbrough, Luton nailed on. So
you think Sheffield United will pip Middlesbrough?
don't know. Well, you said we wasn't going positionally, Connor, so I'm going to keep that
Did
very
I?
loose. Yeah,
Okay.
you said it's not well, unless you want me to give you a position for second and third.
No, I don't mind it. I'm easy. I don't mind either way, really.
I think that's too close to call now. I really do. I mean, I'm looking at it. Sheffield United got a game in hand. They're 3 points clear. But, if Norwich did the business this weekend and Middlesbrough did the business, then, they're level on points. So I think that one's very difficult to call in terms of the second. But I do think that will be the top three: Burnley, Sheffield United, Middlesbrough. I think Luton have got that real battle-hardened consistency. Worth reiterating, I know it's a different manager in charge, but they got to the top six last season. They've got a group of players who know what it takes to see the job through in terms of top six. I don't see them falling away. Blackburn and Millwall, you'd think probably one of those two might have the staying power. Not sure which, but I could. And so effectively, we're looking at one slot available. If you think there's 5 clubs who are going to shore up their position from the current crop, yeah, I think it's a pick-em there, isn't it? Anybody from Watford, West Brom, Cov, Norwich, Millwall, Blackburn for 2 spots. So I think I'd probably, it's pure guesswork now, but I think the top 4, including Luton, I think you can pretty much ink them in. And then for me, it's, well, we'll go Millwall and maybe Coventry.
I've got Coventry in mine, and I'll tell you the reason. I'll tell you the reason for why, and it's
Mark Robbins,
Victor. Well, and also Victor Gyökeres, who is, for me, a Premier League grade striker, and certainly if Coventry don't go up this year, he's one that I think certainly most teams in the bottom half of the Premier League would pluck and put straight into their starting lineup. Not to flog him, Pad. So I'm sorry for that. So I'll go the other direction. So I'll go Coventry. I think Millwall will stick around under Gary Rowett. I think they've got the robustness and the relentlessness to do it. Luton as well. I think Middlesbrough are going to pip Sheffield United, so I'm going to put Sheffield United third, Middlesbrough, then Burnley. So that's going to be my top 6, but we've probably both got it drastically wrong. So that's the beauty of this. This is why we never do looking forward podcasts. You see, we're always reflecting rather than looking forward. But there we go. We've gazed into our crystal ball. Of course, you can let us know your top 6 as well. Maybe we'll make that a 3-part question to go out on our socials at some stage. As I mentioned a few times last Saturday, no Norwich City game. I took the trip down the A47 to Peterborough. Derby were there. I went with the intention of watching Tony Springett play a game of football. He didn't get off the bench, but he did have time to speak to me afterwards. Here's what he had to say. Tony, let's start with the obvious question. How are you finding it? How are you getting on? Really enjoying it, I would imagine.
Yeah, really enjoying it. I mean, the situation at Norwich wasn't bad. I just felt like at this point, 20 years old, I've got to be playing games. I feel like playing 21's games wasn't improving me as much as I would like to. So obviously me and the gaffer made the decision to send me out to Derby, and to be honest, since coming here I've received nothing but love. I'm playing games, I'm playing minutes. Sometimes when I don't start, I still come on. So I can't really complain, I'm loving it.
And I guess you got the taste for it last year a little bit, and I guess once you get the taste for it, you want more, don't you? And to come to a club like Derby, the fans that we saw here today, but also the playing squad experience, players who have played in the Premier League, it's a no-brainer from your perspective, right, at this stage of your career? Yeah,
definitely. I feel like you said, when you get a taste of it, you don't really want to go back to playing enclosed games. So obviously I came here, could have taken a lower team, League 2, but I think when I spoke to the gaffer here, he was just honest with me, told me we're fighting for promotion. It's going to be hard to get in the starting lineup, but if you want to take on that challenge, then it's up to you. And you know me, I work hard, so I just saw the challenge and thought, why not go for it? Choose the harder option rather than the easy option. And sometimes it pays off. I've started 2 games, sometimes it don't, but I'm still playing, so I'm happy.
Yeah, and I guess it's the experience overall, isn't it? Even if you're not starting games. I mean, you've been at Norwich for a long period of time. Coming to a new environment, how was that been? Because I imagine that was something that maybe was a little bit daunting for you to start with.
Loads of people, everyone at Norwich probably would have thought it wasn't because of the character that I am. But no, coming up to the first week, I was really nervous because obviously you don't know how people are going to take your personality, or if there's any people at the club that just don't like loan players, or there's loads of different reasons why I was nervous. But ever since the first day, honestly, the change room here is absolutely incredible. All the older lads, more experienced lads there, making me learn new stuff every day. I'm in the changing room, whereas back at Norwich I wasn't. I was still in under 21s, so I feel like I'm just more involved. I'm not really looked at as a young player here. I'm more like looked at as someone that's been brought in to help the squad, which I enjoy more really, because I feel like I'm more respected. Whereas at Norwich I'm going to have to earn that over the time. So yeah, just literally everyone here I couldn't give a bad word about one person in the change room.
And Paul Warne as well. I mean, you mentioned it. I think I heard him refer to you as like a bottle of Coke, or something. Yeah, which is, I don't think I've ever heard a player described in that way. I mean, he's a unique character. How much you enjoy sort of working with him?
I'm loving it, because when you're making a decision like going on loan, it could either go one or two ways. The gaffer says you're going to play every game you come and you don't. Whereas with the gaffer here, he told me exactly how it is before I came. Like I mentioned before, you're going to have to earn your spot, earn your playing time. And he stuck by everything. Every time I haven't started, he's given me a good reason why I haven't. And when I have started, he's told me why. So honestly, I couldn't ask for a better gaffer.
And in terms of Norwich, what's the communication been like? I know they have Hughes, who's the loan manager. Yeah. Do you have a lot of communication with him, and are you in sort of on contact regularly with them?
Yeah, Hughes is a top man. He keeps in contact with me all the time, honestly. Once a week he'll give me a phone call, or I'll give him a phone call if I feel like I need to speak to him. So he's always just updating me, asking me how I'm getting on, or if I'm not starting, why am I not starting, or how did the game go when I do come on or do start. So yeah, the communication's great. I couldn't ask for more from Hughesy from his side. I know he's got a lot on, obviously Norwich got a lot on their table right now, so him taking his time out of his day to contact me, see how I'm getting on, I do really appreciate it.
And just finally, I guess now you've got a taste of this experience, sort of moving into next season, you'll want to be playing regularly again. And if that isn't the case at Norwich, I guess you'd look again for another loan move.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm putting myself in a situation where I want to go back to Norwich in a good position, and I'm not the type of person to kind of just move aside for someone. Obviously, I love everyone at Norwich, all the players, staff, but if I don't have a clear path into being on the bench or starting by the start of the season, then I'm going to want to look to go out on another loan or whatever the future holds. But I'm not really thinking about that right now. I feel like that's something for me to deal with on my off time. Right now, I'm just focused on getting promoted with this club here, and I'm loving every second of it.
There you go. So there's Tony Springett. Really lovely chatting to him. He spoke to me just after his warm down. So he started a little bit out of breath, and I think I ended it a little bit out of breath. So there's a nice contrast there. It was very nice.
Why was you out of breath, Connor? Explain.
Well, just existing. It's just exhausting, isn't it?
I thought you were jogging on. I'm getting visions of you jogging on the spot or something like that. Around
no, I was actually stood in the home technical area speaking to him, because it's a slightly raised surface there. And I just had a lovely chat with is it Dan Butler, who plays for Peterborough? He's a very nice chap. So asked me what I was doing. I said I've covered Norwich City. Why are you here? Was basically the question. I had that a lot throughout the afternoon. But yeah, thank you to Peterborough for their lovely hosting, and it was a really interesting game of football, actually. Paul Warne, obviously the Derby manager, so there's Norwich links there. That race in the playoffs in League One is absolutely fascinating. Automatic promotion and a title race all wrapped into one. Derby were beaten 2-0 by Peterborough, who are in really good form at the moment, even though they absolutely battered them in the first half. Interesting to watch players like Conor Hourihane, who obviously was someone that I think some Norwich fans wouldn't have minded to see in yellow and green last summer. Felt he really struggled. David McGoldrick also really struggled. They've got quite a few players there who you'd kind of recognise at Derby, but probably doesn't really feel like a Paul Warne team at the moment. So whether that's going to kind of halt them from getting into the playoffs, I don't know. Tony Springett really enjoying his experience there, as you heard. But that probably lends us onto a wider discussion, Pad, about, I guess we've spoken so much about rebuilds and changes and sort of shuffling about various pieces on the chessboard next season. Where do you see the likes of Tony Springett, Jonathan Tompkinson, Barley Mumba, players who have gone out on loan or are on the periphery of the squad, who maybe will come back? And you heard Tony say in that interview there that he hopes when he does come back in the summer, there is a pathway that at least consists of him getting onto the bench with a view, obviously, then to starting games. If not, he'll look for another loan. I would imagine certainly a few more will come back like that. I guess Barley Mumba probably tops that list, right, after what he's done at Plymouth this season.
Well, yes, and also Liam Gibbs, who we haven't mentioned, but I touched on, we hosted the Q&A on the PinkUn app earlier this week, and I've got the question up here. Richard, what does Liam Gibbs have to do to get a look in? Midfield has been dreadful of late. And you can debate the whys and wherefores of that statement, but I think it is pertinent to mention Liam Gibbs. And, my reply to Richard on the Q&A was along the lines of, I think he's just been unfortunate. He started, different manager, I know, but he started in the team, was playing well, looked really at home. For such a young, raw talent, it didn't look like it was phasing him at all. He's, as anybody who's watched him play, he's very, very good on the ball, good range of passing. I think he's understated his sort of athleticism and his physicality. I know David Wagner has subsequently talked that he doesn't think physically he can play the 6, maybe the McLean, Zara role, Sorensen role. And obviously he knows him, he sees him a lot closer quarters than we do. And if that's his opinion, then so be it. But, from a position where he looked like he was establishing himself, he then got that injury. I think it was Sunderland away. That took him out of the side. I recall he got sort of fast-tracked in at Watford, and then he got hooked for Isaac Hayden at half-time, a little bit harshly. I think there was a few comments from Dean Smith as well, about almost citing that they needed a bit more of a streetwise edge. And, clearly Hayden at that point they felt was going to be the one who came through. Subsequently hasn't happened. We know about his injury backstory. And then a change of manager, and then it's all bets are off again. And particularly for younger players, it's probably doubly hard because they don't have any back catalogue really for David Wagner to tap into. But there is no doubt, because when I put it to David Wagner about Liam Gibbs, only a matter of weeks ago, his face positively lit up about what a talent this guy is. And yes, added he didn't think right now he could play him in a deeper position, but as a prospect, he doesn't need to convince David Wagner. It's just a case of, as David said, patience as a young player and keep performing in training. The opportunities will come. Then you've got to take them. And for Gibbs, Reed, Barley Mumble when he comes back, Tompkinson, Tony Springett, who you spoke to, even Jaden Warner, maybe Abu Kamara, some of these others who are just bubbling below at development level. There is a group of players who I think David Wagner quite likes from what he's seen so far, and it all then flows into the broader point about, if it is Championship football, how do you integrate them? How do you bring them from the periphery, from, I like the look of him in training, to, no, he's going to be on my starting team sheet come August in the Championship next season. And that's such a delicate balancing act. And of course, we skip back to Daniel Farker, what a pass master he was, and maybe out of necessity, that first Championship season, or the second one, but the first title win, where he had to go and give Max Aarons a go, or Jamal Lewis, or Ben Godfrey, or Todd Cantwell to a lesser extent, James Maddison. That was out of necessity in many respects, but boy, did it pay off. But I think Farker was the type of coach who was willing to give youth a chance anyway, and because we saw that moving forward, when maybe he didn't need to quite so out of necessity go down that route, but he did, and he continued to remain true to developing younger players. And I think Wagner, my sense is he's cut from the same cloth, but ultimately, it's really going to be about timing, and it's about when you give these players an opportunity. But I feel there is talent there at that level, and we've talked about those names. And as part of a broader refresh and renewal, and moving some of the older players on or out to the side, these players should be considered and need to be considered, because I think it's also sending a signal to your fan base as well. If it's the same older heads really who are still locking out those starting positions next season, if it is the Championship, I don't think that really sends your fan base a signal that this is different, this is new, this is something that you can feel as the dial has shifted, and that we're looking forward with a new set of players. And I know, as I say, to repeat myself, that is difficult, because the expectation still on Norwich in the Championship would be that they are winning games of football and they're competing at the right end of the table. It isn't a development club that David Wagner has joined. This is a club with aspirations and expectations that they can get back to the Premier League, and the sooner the better. So he has the pressure to produce results, but I think it also does need a sense, and particularly as well from those players. If you're Liam Gibbs, you want to feel that you're working under a head coach where you will get an opportunity, and that those first team pathways are there. And maybe that's a nice segue to to debate Alex Matos and what's happening to him as well. And I'll throw that one back to you, Connor, because you did a piece on him a couple of days ago. But, if you set yourself up and one of your pillars as a club is to be a pathway to allow very good young talent an opportunity to flourish, and ultimately, let's go back to Liam Gibbs. He left Ipswich to join Norwich because he probably felt he could get to a first team a bit quicker at Norwich because Farker had done what he'd done with those aforementioned players. Then you need those pathways to be open and the door, to paraphrase what Dan used to say, to be open, and for players then to walk through it, close the door behind them, and say, "I'm not going back through that door. I'm here to stay." So that's imperative, really. If you are, as Webber has constructed, a club built on developing talent, then that talent needs an opportunity to come through, and that's why I think, although it would be hugely disappointing if this season tails away and they don't achieve that stated aim of getting back to the Premier League at the first attempt, at least if you could start to see the integration and the blossoming of some of the players we've mentioned, then you feel there is a sense of renewal, and that's going to be so important moving forward because it would feel very much end of an era at the end of this season, and there needs to be a clear signal that it is an end of an era and a page is being turned. Not, well, we'll have another season with a lot of the tried and trusted, because ultimately a lot of the tried and trusted, if it plays out as we feel it will do over the next 8 games, will have failed to deliver. So do you give them another opportunity, or do you say, no, time for a more bolder direction again, and we'll stride forward with, at heart, some very talented young players who we feel, if we back them and give them the opportunities, will come to the fore and we'll drive this club forward again. Because that's ultimately, if you take it right back to the start of the Webber era with Farker alongside him, that's what powered it. That's what powered that first title win, was young, raw talent given an opportunity, grabbed it and never looked back, and took us all on that unforgettable journey, that first 18-19 title winning season. So, why not reconnect with, to paraphrase Alex Neil after the Stoke game, the DNA of Norwich, the DNA of this Norwich under Stuart Webber's guidance as being at its heart, trusting young players. And, sadly, to throw it right back to you now, Connor, that would appear not to be going to be the case with a very highly rated, even younger talent in the academy called Alex Matos.
Yes, and just to bring people up to speed who maybe have missed this, so he's a young Norwich City, he's in the under-18s, he's 18 years of age, but has been playing at 23s level, someone who's been with Norwich, I think, since about under-12 level, joined from Luton. So again, it's for all maybe of the criticism of the academy system and bigger teams in inverted commas, taking or handpicking that talent out of again, clubs maybe lower down the pyramid, Norwich have benefited from that as well. So that's a footnote that's worth remembering. But it sounds like he is pretty close to joining Chelsea by all accounts. Chelsea have been interested for a long time. I think wrote a piece after he signed his first contract at Norwich to say that was in an attempt to kind of thwart interest from them. So there's been a persistent interest from them. I think Darren Eady tweeted, who's worked with Matos at the Langley School during his period there, that he was one of the most talented players that he's worked with. I've had that sentiment shared with me by a few ex-coaches of his as well, who've worked at Norwich City at various stages. And this is where probably from what you said there, Pad, raises so many questions, because yes, Chelsea is a very attractive proposition for any young player in terms of facilities, in terms of setup. And I guess maybe the difference between the interest last time and the interest this time is that there's a different structure there, a different ownership there, and a different idea there. And maybe this they can sell the fact that they've got Graham Potter, a manager who traditionally has given young players opportunities before. And there's a real desire from Todd Bowley, and obviously completely revamped what they do at kind of sporting director level and technical directors, and sort of changed their scouting network. That means that they basically want to make their under-21s as good as they can. They've spent a lot of money on young players to try and basically become the club that has all of the best players in world football. So whether it's that has sold Alex Matos a move to Chelsea, I don't know. I guess the question would be, what has changed from a Norwich perspective that makes him feel that Chelsea's now a better, more viable option, I suppose? And that probably lends into what you said there, Pad, in terms of Norwich's USP, if you want to do it like that, has never been that they can offer the best for obviously the training grounds dramatically improved, and it's worth mentioning that as well. But certainly they can't offer the money or the prestige or reputation of playing for Chelsea, for example. But what they could offer was actually a realistic and tangible pathway to the first team, which then, if you did well, would allow you to take the step on. And we've seen players, we could list Ben Godfrey, Jamal Lewis, James Maddison, who didn't come from Norwich's academy, but obviously was part of that process as well, have all been allowed to take that step. So if that's the idea, what has changed that's made Alex Matos feel that Chelsea is a better option for him? Now, that could be entirely down to personal circumstances. It could be finance. It could be the allure of playing for Chelsea. It could be all of those things. My only thing that I would say to kind of counter that is, well, all of that was the same beyond, obviously, the project and structural changes that we spoke about. All of that existed before, and he committed to Norwich in those circumstances. So was it that he wasn't as close to the first team as maybe he wanted to be at this stage? And I think, and again, I wrote about this, there's some very talented players through that age group. Ruben Chipoke, who joined Aston Villa in October 2020 for about £1 million. You've got Arlo Doherty, who's a goalkeeper who was at Manchester City and is now at Leicester. Obviously, Matos as well. There are a couple other examples of players leaving Norwich City for kind of bigger things. There's a young lad, 17-year-old at Chelsea, who was released by Norwich. So there are various circumstances, and obviously we never know the full story around that. But I think it's difficult to conclude that because I'm sure you, Paddy, have spoken to people as well, and they would have told you, Matos, this guy's good and this player's good. And given the pathway and the way that Norwich exists, where it's so important to get young players on this conveyor belt, and I don't necessarily want to turn this into a blame game because we don't have all of the facts and all the justification as to why he made that decision. Ultimately, only him and his representatives know that, and only Norwich know that, and only Chelsea know that. But it does feel disappointing whenever you have a talent who's that highly regarded and that spoke about in those terms and has got so close, played in the 23s, and his role has changed. He was a wide player and kind of an attacking player. He's been a bit more of a central player this year, and played for Chelsea by all accounts in a development game against Charlton last Friday, I think, alongside N'Golo Kante as a central midfielder, and recorded a couple of assists. So I guess to go back to earlier, disappointment is the word, isn't it? Irrespective of how it's come about or why it's come about or the various reasons, I think the frustration is that maybe you've got a talent like that who, for whatever reason, no longer clearly feels that Norwich is the best option for their development for whatever reason. And that feels like a bit of a blow. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Pad, really.
Yeah, nothing more really, Connor, but you are right. But I mean, you listed one or two others who have since departed. I guess that's unless you went away and did some forensic studies about academies in the top two divisions. But it wouldn't surprise me if that type of churn and turnover is not out of the ordinary. It's just when you get somebody through, because we all know, or at least we have a sense of how difficult it is to sift for those sort of gems, and that there's a lot of disappointment for players who go through, and journalists like Michael Calvin have obviously done lots of good stuff about the downsides of players who get cast to the side, and that's wholly on the clubs who've made decisions that players at certain age groups or certain progression points aren't quite going to reach the levels that they feel they need, and they move to the side. And I know clubs certainly nowadays, and this would apply to Norwich definitely, of the care that goes around those type of players who aren't maybe going to make it at a Norwich or any other club, that there are jumping off points, and there is that support network now. I think that's definitely improved in terms of the academy setup. But ultimately, it is a business, and it's a ruthless business, and they know, all the clubs know, Norwich included, that if you can produce players good enough to come in and operate in your first team and push a club on, be it Championship level or even Premier League level, the financial element to that in terms of an asset, is, well, Norwich have made no bones about it, and we touched on it in the previous segment. That ability to self-generate funds from players you've developed is absolutely essential to a club with Norwich's business model. That's the top and bottom of it. And we go back to Maddison, and yes, he wasn't one who came through. He was developed by Coventry's academy, but it was Norwich where he finished his sort of development. And if James Maddison hadn't departed in that summer of 17-18, then it's not overemphasizing the point that Norwich financially would have been in a very, very dark place, and that was averted because they developed a player sufficiently that a club like Leicester wanted to come along and put down 21-22 million pounds initially with a series of add-ons. Norwich basically were able to embark on what came afterwards on the strength of being able to sell a player for the funds that they managed to do for James Maddison. And we've seen that subsequently. Less imperative in terms of keeping the wolf from the door, but Jamal Lewis, Ben Godfrey, of course, as well. Even Buendia, if you want to broaden it out a little bit, that is the business model. And so if that is the business model and you understand that, then it's imperative that Norwich continue that cycle and that conveyor of talent. Yes, in the immediate term, good enough to come and play in your first team and improve your first team, but always with the awareness that one day, if they do develop, as you hope they will, and blossom and flourish, that they then will become a tradable asset, and to then lose a player potentially, as it would appear, to a club like Chelsea. And there will obviously be remuneration involved, but I don't think it will come close to, if they'd brought him all the way through to first team level and then he proved himself at first team level and then he moved on. I think it's safe to say, studies would show that you're never going to get the true market value of a player if they leave at this point of the cycle. That's the frustration, I'm sure, huge frustration from Norwich's perspective, that it's almost, and maybe now I think about it, Coventry may have felt the same about Norwich, that they developed a James Maddison, but it was Coventry.
Luton as well.
Yeah, exactly, with Aarons and Lewis. And maybe that's the natural order of things, that unfortunately there are clubs who Norwich will have developed finished off players who developed elsewhere and reaped the financial rewards. And potentially with a Matos, it'll be Chelsea who are the end game in this particular scenario. And that's just as I say, much as when Norwich find themselves in the Premier League, particularly the natural order of things, and that's Norwich's place in the natural order. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, it is a frustration, I'm sure, to Webber and the people who've constructed this model, because it removes a very, very highly rated commodity, both in the short term for Norwich's own first team plans, but also longer term as well. And the worry for me would be moving forward, if this rolls out as expected now, and this lad does end up at Chelsea, what signal does that send to people already in the academy who are looking at that, and maybe feeling that maybe there are other opportunities beyond Norwich for them to continue their footballing and education in terms of the bridge from academy to development to first team football, but also because of the cyclical nature of this, Norwich will be trying to bring players to Norwich and bring players into young players, young highly rated players, much younger age groups, but nevertheless bring them into Norwich's academy. And if their parents or people around them are looking at it and seeing that Norwich aren't offering that pathway right all the way through to first team, then does it look a bit of a negative in terms of the next waves and the next cycle of academy recruitment? That would be my concern. But I guess while it's painful, if it's isolated cases we're talking about, that's one thing. If you start to lose more and more players at 16, 17, 18 years of age to the elite clubs in this country, then yes, it's a backhanded compliment that you're doing something right at academy level, but ultimately it's something that I'm sure Webber and his staff would have to give some serious thought to, because they very definitely haven't constructed a model whereby they develop talent and identify talent to the age of 17, 18, and thereafter another club gets the benefit for footballing and financial reasons.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, we await confirmation of that for absolute sure, but all the signs, I guess, suggesting that Alex Matos will become a Chelsea player at some point. Finally, then, Pad, let's kind of end with how you see Saturday going. Very difficult game in reality against Sheffield United in second. Big game for all of the reasons that we discussed earlier. How do you see it transpiring? I'm not going to ask you for a prediction because we'll save that for Saturday, and I'll definitely forget mine in the intervening period and change it 4 times. So How do you see that as a game going? And I guess just to reiterate the importance for Norwich City.
Well, I was just having a look there, Connor, at the Blades' last 4 league games. They've actually lost 2 of the last 4, albeit Blackburn and Luton. So 2 of the teams who were right there with them in the playoff / automatic race. So, I know they've had a brilliant run in the FA Cup and they've got themselves through to a semi-final now as well. That could, potentially be a distraction for them. Not for this weekend, I don't think necessarily, but it is there in the background. And I look at that and I look at that recent form line, and of course, people could say, well, let's look at Norwich's recent form line, and post Millwall, it's rank really for where Norwich were hoping to get to. It's definitely been a regressive cycle. So maybe there's not too much optimism to be sort of mined by looking at Sheffield United's recent league results, but nevertheless, I don't. It's not for me a Burnley coming to Carrow Road. It's not even maybe a Middlesbrough. Maybe even a real tough nut to crack in a Luton at the minute. If you look at their results, I think there is an opportunity for Norwich, but not the Norwich we've seen against Sunderland, Huddersfield, Stoke. If that Norwich turns up, then I'm afraid it'll only go the same way, and that'll be, potentially a defeat, at best a draw. I don't see the Norwich of the last 3 games in the Championship being good enough to turn over Sheffield United, who was really in the heat of a battle for automatic promotion with Middlesbrough principally. So I just hope that if we get the Millwall vintage or the Millwall version, both with and without the ball, and that intensity and that aggressiveness is in their play, and the energy and the physicality and that full throttle, to paraphrase David Wagner's brand of football, is there from the start to the finish, then I see Norwich winning the game. But unfortunately, if we look at the recent sample, it's hard to sort of say, well, we'll overlook Sunderland, we'll overlook Huddersfield, and we'll overlook Stoke, because they're the 3 most recent games. So, again, it's more hope than expectation. But I look at Sheffield United recently in the league, and when they've come up against the sides in and around them, they've come up short. But, Norwich will have to be far better than they have been in the last 3 league games if they're going to get that win that it feels like they need to really kickstart this 8-game stretch, but in reality, this 4-game stretch, which I think will define ultimately how this season plays out. And if it goes the other way, then I think we'll probably already have the writing on the wall, and all will remain is the confirmation of what we all feel then, which is this group isn't good enough, and it really needs to be broken up and rebuilt again, and that's a whole different podcast and series of podcasts, because I think the chances of Norwich being able to do a major overhaul for the financial and footballing reasons in one window are probably unrealistic. So then we get into a debate about how long it's going to take to rebuild it, but we'll park that one for now. But yeah, I don't think it's overstating it, as we did earlier, to say this is probably the biggest game of Norwich's season for me, and they need to perform. Simple as that. Where's your head at then, Connor, for Saturday?
Yeah, much the same. I think it feels like an important game for the narrative, and as you said, how you set up the final 8 games. So certainly an encouraging performance, but if they could add a result on top, and by result, you're probably looking at victory really, then I think that the dial would shift, and how people feel about the remaining 8 games of this season would be drastically different. So let's see what we get. We're going to be at Carrow Road on Saturday, of course, for all our usual coverage, analysis of that game against Sheffield United. Absolutely massive. As we've said, you don't need us to talk it up. It's big enough already. If you're yet to do so, do take out a free month's trial to the PinkUn Plus. You can do that. Plenty of content available over there for you to fulfill all your Norwich City needs during the final few dry days before we're back at Colney for David Wagner's press conference on Friday, and then obviously back at Carrow Road on Saturday. Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate your time as ever, and thank you for watching if you did that on YouTube as well, and we'll see you very soon.